Good morning, everybody, or afternoon, or evening, or wherever you are in the world. It's good to see you. Before we begin, a couple of small housekeeping notes. I would encourage everyone to um, like this video, and also, if you're not already a subscriber to GMAT Club, then go ahead and click on the subscribe button so that you can continue to get uh, content from the different creators and experts here at GMAT Club. All right. And also, if you have any questions along the way during the course of this presentation, please drop them in the comments. I'll be checking those along the way, and I will try to answer those as they come up. And there's also be a time dedicated at the end to answer any questions. All right. Let's go ahead and get started. For today's conversation, what I'm going to be talking about is a concern that a lot of clients have when I deal with them. And that's this question of how do they make sure that they come across as not boastful. And this is a problem that I would say maybe a third of my clients have, just in terms of feeling a sense of unease about how they approach describing the most important moments in their lives. Um, who am I, and why am I talking to you here today? I'm Brian Fobi. I'm the CEO of Gurufi. We're a company that focuses exclusively on the written aspects of your application, so namely the personal statements, short answers, CV, etc. We've been around since 2008. Since then, we've helped over 10,000 applicants get into their dream schools. Every year, our clients get into all the top schools. Last year, we had multiple people who ended up going to Stanford, Stanford GSB, Wharton, Harvard Business School, NSEAD, Oxford, Stern, etc. So if you need assistance with your personal statement, do check us out at gurufi.com. All right. Now, first off, I want to try to convey this idea that when you're doing your personal statement, try as best you can not to worry too much about coming across as too boastful. And specifically, I want you to think about it in these terms. The issue with bragging, right, on your personal statement is not the fact that you're painting yourself in a positive light. All right. That's not what the issue is. A personal statement, after all, and an application needs to do that. Right? You're trying to present the best version of yourself. Um, Now, the reason that a lot of people have challenges with this, a lot of times when I'm talking to clients, I'll kind of joke with them that uh, emotionally and psychologically healthy people don't go around praising themselves, right? In everyday conversation, it's easier to praise others. It's easier for you to talk about the good things that you see in other places and other people who are doing fun and interesting and cool things and important things. But psychologically healthy people don't spend a lot of time talking about themselves in really positive lights. Okay. And as a result, it's not something we have a ton of practice with. And so it can feel really uneasy when it comes time for you to sit down and write a personal statement or to approach an application process where the purpose is to show your best self and to talk about the moments that you're really proud of. Instinctively, people sort of feel like, oh no, like I don't want to come across as smug or as overly boastful. You kind of have to put that aside in an application process. There's some specific things that we can do, and we're going to talk about that in the course of the next half hour or so, about how you can actually make sure that your personal statement doesn't come across as too boastful. But as a general matter, just in terms of your psychological or emotional approach to this question, except from the start, that part of this is you needing to show your best self and to talk about your best self. Now, if the issue isn't um, making sure that you talk about or that you don't talk about yourself in really positive ways, then what is the issue? Well, as I said before, bragging is not casting yourself in an overly positive light. That's not the issue. Bragging, especially at least in the context of a personal statement or your application, is saying positive things about yourself without providing proof. Okay. And that's going to be the consistent theme here, is that you need to make sure that you are linking every positive thing that you want to convey in your application to a particular instance and a demonstration of that thing. If your essay comes across as bragging, it's not necessarily because you had the wrong mindset or that you approached it with an overly proud perspective. The issue is probably a failure of storytelling. And it's funny, like, when I work with clients over and over and over, the thing that I try to emphasize with them is that a personal statement is about telling a story, and that when they work well, it's because the story has been told well. And you can come across as a fantastic, smart, capable, and accomplished person that the reader likes. That's a successful story that you've told. And it's not about making sure that you hold back or that you approach it with an overly humble perspective. It's about making sure that your story has clarity and balance. Okay. Now, what is the number one piece of advice that anyone gets when they're in the course, when they're writing a personal statement, right? The thing that everyone always tells people when they're writing a personal statement is show, don't tell. And I always say that this is a wonderful piece of advice and that it is true, but it is a terrible piece of advice. And that once someone tells you that, it's not exactly clear what you should do, right? It's like saying, well, how do I make my personal statement better? And the person says, well, write a great personal statement. Well, yeah, that's true, but like, what's the concrete, identifiable things that you can take away from that you can actually follow up on and deliver on? So when someone says show, don't tell, what does that mean for you? Well, again, it comes back to storytelling and making sure that we have good storytelling elements. So here's just two quick examples of why telling is bad and why showing can work, especially within the context of worrying about boasting and bragging. So telling would be saying, in the context of your personal statement, something like, I have great entrepreneurial instincts. All right. So this is you praising yourself and saying this good thing about you. But it can come across as boastful because there is no proof attached to it. Right. Showing, by contrast, is when you were to say something like, when Jane and I built Xenotech, we identified an unserved niche in the market and created a plan to service it. All right. Those two things, in some senses, are doing the same thing. They are showing, or they're talking about, rather, the fact that you have great entrepreneurial instincts. One is simply telling the basic fact, I have great entrepreneurial instincts, but that doesn't really move anybody. Showing, though, is providing a story, an example that demonstrates that you have great entrepreneurial instincts. And in fact, and I'll talk about this a bit later, when you effectively show something, you don't actually need to have that sentence where you say, I have great entrepreneurial instincts, because that will be clear to the reader. All right. Your story should make clear the trait that you're trying to convey. And in other words, like it says there, if you actually have to say the phrase, I have great entrepreneurial instincts, then you're failing. Right. If you remember, if any of you guys used to watch the TV show Game of Thrones, there's a moment when one of the characters shouts, I am the king. And his father says, any man who must say, I am the king is no king at all. And the idea there is, if there are some things that if you have to say it, there's something else that has failed. So if you actually have to list your positive traits, that means the story hasn't delivered on that point. And a good place to start in order to solve this problem or to work through it is, before you even start writing your personal statement, when you're in the planning phases, the foundation of that personal statement should be the core traits that you want to convey. So a good exercise when you start planning for your personal statement is to make a list of, say, 3 to 5 traits that you want to convey about yourself. And for each one of those traits, list instances and examples and stories that show that trait. Every trait that you convey should always be connected to and demonstrated by a particular story. And those stories will be the things that end up building out your personal statement. And so that when you show and don't just tell, right, you can say really positive and impressive things about yourself, and it won't come across as boastful. It will come across as you telling a story that the person finds interesting and compelling. And by extension, you will come across as interesting and compelling. Okay, so how do you build a great story, right? You don't have to brag if your story is great. We've covered that. How do you write a great story? And this is where I always say that, a great story has got to have the steak and the sizzle. All right. It's a kind of famous American aphorism. It's not in sales, right? Salesmen like to say it's not the steak, it's the sizzle. Well, in writing, it's both, right? You've got to have the substance there, but you've also got to have the stuff that makes the reader interested in the ideas that you're trying to convey. So, what is the steak? Every personal statement should have a clear why. All right. For you, this would be, why are you pursuing an MBA and why now? Okay. It should also have a concrete and simple vision of your future. I'm going to talk more about this in a second, but personal statements, people like to think of them as being a way to explain your past. That is part of a personal statement. But primarily, the thing that you should think about is your personal statement is about the future. You are attempting to gain admission into a program, and part of that should be to explain how that program, how this MBA process fits within the future that you're trying to build for yourself. And if you don't have a concrete and simple vision for your future that you can convey, all of the past experiences won't really cohere in a way that makes clear to the reader why you want to get an MBA. All right. Evidence of ability or potential has to be grounded in the past, right? So you are talking about the future, but the evidence that you use to demonstrate that your future is a real one and not just a silly daydream is stuff that you bring from the past. If you have these elements, a clear why, a concrete vision for your future, and the ability to talk about your future by relying on your past, it's almost impossible to brag, because what you're talking about is a compelling story. You're not just boasting. And so, by contrast, if that's the steak, what is the sizzle? Sizzle is showing passion for what you do, showing excitement about your future, and a sense of justified self-belief. Let me talk about those first three ones before I talk about this last three, the human elements. One of the things that I think a great personal statement does is it demonstrates excitement and passion. All right. A personal statement cannot be and should not be just a repetition or recitation of your CV. You've got to show the reader why you're juiced about this next phase. All right. That's why using words like excitement in your essay are good, because it shows that you really want to do this. And one of the great things about passion or excitement is that when you convey it, other people kind of, it's almost infectious, right? People want to be around other people who are excited about the thing that they're doing or the thing that they're about to do. And so if you convey that, then that's an interesting and attractive quality. And so as you put together your personal statement, think about ways that you can demonstrate a sense of commitment and excitement about your future. And this needs to be also connected to this third point, is a sense of justified self-belief. Now, personal statements, especially for elite MBA programs, often talk about the future and like the big things that they want to do. And that is awesome and amazing. But if you have a big future plan for yourself, you've kind of got to be able to show maybe some big things or important things or big ideas or big lessons that you've learned in the past, or else there'll be an imbalance there. It needs to be justified. Every sense of self-belief that you project, I want to do this awesome, amazing thing. I want to found a big company that does X. I want to have this entrepreneurial vision that transforms some industry. That needs to be justified, or else you're going to come across as a daydreamer. You justify it by bringing things from your past, connecting it to the experience that you want to have in their MBA program, and those things will balance out to create a justified sense of self-belief. And lastly, it's also important to have human elements. It's what sometimes we call the 3 L's, which is demonstrating leadership, demonstrating learning, and demonstrating loss. Now, I think it was last year I gave a whole one of these talks that you can find in the GMAT Club's YouTube page, where you talk about how you talk about tough things, difficult moments that you've had. So I won't necessarily go into a ton of detail about how you talk about loss, but a lot of times I think people wrongly assume that you cannot talk about difficult things or missteps in your admissions process. You absolutely can. The focus should be on what you learned from it, how you grew from it, and how going through that clarified your sense of what you aspire to do and become. Leadership is a little bit more straightforward in the sense that here you want to talk about important decisions that you've made, efforts, groups, et cetera, that you've led. All right. Now, again, just to kind of sum up, you should reject this binary idea that your essay should either be analytical and serious, or emotional, human, and touchy feely. All business schools care about both sides. Admittedly, some care about one more than the other. But even if you are applying to a business school that's kind of very quant focused or finance heavy, you still do want to convey a sense of what your future is, what you aspire to do, and also that you're excited about it, that this is a step in your life that you're really juiced to take. Again, some business schools will care about the touchy-feely side more. Some will care about the more analytical and serious stuff, but you should aspire to have both in there. All right. So how do we solve some of these problems then if you feel like your essay is imbalanced? So the first is the all steak and no sizzle problem. And this happens when candidates have the opposite problem of maybe being too boastful, but this is when they're afraid to let themselves shine. They maybe focus too much on the basic beats of their biography. So this is almost like they've just taken their CV and they've imported it into a personal statement and turned it into an essay without really doing much work to tell a story. It doesn't provide insight into what they thought or felt at moments of challenge. Remember, stories should be built around particular moments and choices that you made where you faced a difficulty. And it should briefly take the reader inside your thinking and inside your sense of what the challenge was, so that they understand your journey through that. Importantly, kind of the all steak, no sizzle essays often don't have enough collaboration. Last year, I did a podcast with Russ Morgan, who's one of the deans at Duke Fuqua, and he gave this wonderful insight that I've talked about a lot in different settings, where their admissions team actually kind of keeps an informal tally of how many times you say me versus we. That is any, and all the me's and we's, which is like, are you saying I did something or we did something? Because they want to see you collaborate and interacting with people. This is, yes, it is your personal statement and your personal journey, but this needs to be within the context of groups and organizations that you're within, right? There's an old saying that a leader without followers is just a man taking a walk. They don't want to see you as just a person taking a walk. They want to see you interacting with people. They want to see you as a person with relationships, as a person who can be inspired by others and inspire others, who takes correction and instruction, but also provides mentorship. They want to see you as kind of a living, interacting person in the world. Okay. Too much emphasis on the minutia of deals. A couple of weeks ago, I had a client who worked for major European car company. And in his personal statement, he had a whole section kind of detailing some of the technical issues that he worked with. And, a lot of it went into model numbers and this particular problem, that particular problem. And the problem is it might have been interesting to someone who worked at that company, right? They're in Munich. But to an outside reader, all that technical stuff is just static. It doesn't add anything to the story. So always think about stripping out unnecessary minutia, stuff that the reader doesn't need to know in order to understand the story. Okay. The details that you pick, that should kind of be the metric. Does this help me understand the story and get a flavor for the story? Or am I just throwing in a bunch of corporate lingo that we use in our company but that doesn't actually have much meaning to people outside of it. All right. That just will weigh down your essay and make it too much steak, no sizzle. Last couple of things. If you just list accomplishments and awards, that's what we call CV stuff, right? Stuff to have in your CV. Um, don't burden your essay with those types of things. When you're just listing awards, that is both uninteresting to the reader, and it also starts to tilt you more towards the bragging side of things as opposed to telling a compelling story. Now, when you do these things, um, any of them, many of them in conjunction with each other, what you're doing is you're missing a chance to introduce yourself, and that's partly how you should view what a personal statement is. It's an opportunity for you to show the reader who you are, what you're aspiring to become, and what you care about. By contrast, essays that are all sizzle and no steak, all right, this is the flip side. um, People a lot of times want to, it's like, oh, I gotta add some emotionality to this, and so they'll find an emotional story and they'll jam it in there even if it doesn't quite fit. So it'll be, the story of their best friend getting sick in high school or something. Like, well, what does this have to do with your desire to transform the green energy industry? This is just a story that you thought, well, it might make the reader cry, so I should stick it in there. Don't do that. Anything that's emotional should still have some core connection to the story. If you don't, it's just sizzle and it's disconnected from the steak. The most common place that you'll see this is that people will get obsessed with this idea of having a clever hook. That is an opening that is really catchy and unique and kind of a zinger. Um, and it is important to start your essay in an interesting way, but I think people have the wrong idea about how to do that. You do want to make sure that your essay keeps kind of the same tone and the same theme throughout from beginning to end. And if you have like this over the top introduction and then the rest of the essay is more subdued, it will just feel weird and tacked on. So you don't want to do that. Similarly, people feel like they want to, use every fancy word that they know. Too many adjectives and adverbs, don't do that. Again, coming back to the theme here, boasting without clear examples. If you find yourself saying phrases like "I am great at" or "I am highly skilled at this," but you don't provide evidence of that, that's sizzle and not steak. Excuse me. And lastly, um, people in personal statements a lot of times will write in this kind of fancy and elevated way that doesn't really make sense. And so the thing I'll often tell people is, a really good way um, that you can make sure that your essay feels like you is to read it to somebody. And one of the questions you can ask them is, does this sound like me? And tape record yourself. And I know that it can be, kind of weird and painful to listen to yourself for a lot of people. But as you listen to yourself, ask yourself, do I talk like that? And if you don't, you're probably using words in unusual ways that don't quite seem like you. Um, Obviously, like, you don't want to just insert a bunch of slang and silly fun words that you use when you're talking to your friends, but it should still sound like you. Because when you don't, the conversation will, or your essay will sound too stilted, and it won't feel real to the reader. All right, so how do you fix these problems? How do you add some sizzle? The first thing is that you should think of yourself as the main character in your essay. Uh, and next week, I'm going to be talking about how you can kind of use some examples from movies and fiction to think about how to formulate your essay. But here I'll just say a couple of things. Um, when Sometimes I'll talk to clients about how do you make yourself the hero of your essay. What I don't mean is that you've got to show yourself as like this amazing person who automatically understands everything and can fix any problem. But instead, what a real hero's journey is someone who encounters difficulties, might experience a setback, persists, and then either accomplishes some goal at the end or comes to an important personal revelation. And so you should think of your essay in that way. Are you the main character who has learned something along the way, who has found a sense of themselves, who's overcome things? Okay. And when you do that, you will focus on telling stories, which is the second point. Um, Third, um, the we not me stuff that we talked about before. Really make sure that you show yourself as a collaborative and interactive person. Okay, you should probably not be the only individual who shows up in your essay. It's not a one man show. Is another way of thinking about it. Your essay should show you interacting with real human beings. And lastly, remember that all personal statements are ultimately about the future. What does this say about the future that you're excited about and that you hope to achieve? If you do that, that's a much more interesting essay than simply talking about all the things that you have already done. Um, how to infuse some sizzle, avoid getting bogged down. Again, whenever you have a problem in your essay, so you're talking about, I encountered this professional problem, don't spend more than a sentence or so describing the problem. Make sure that you make it clear what the problem is and how it's a big problem, but then focus most of your attention on how you solved it and how you came out of it on the other side, right? Who were you? What did you know? What lessons did you acquire, etc.? Numbers, technical specs, etc. They usually distract from the story. Um, Even highly technical problems can usually be boiled down into something a little bit more simple and straightforward. Save your energy and save the space in your essay for talking about how you solve the problem and, maybe most importantly, who you were at the end of it. Okay. Um, I like to say the past and future is where sizzle meets steak. And what this means is, again, admissions is about the future. All right. You need to make your reader excited about who you can become. Okay. And you do this by reaching into your past to show, here are the things that I've already done, and so you can have a sense of belief that I can get to this future that I aspire to. And so that is how you paint a compelling vision of who you aspire to be. And this ultimately is storytelling, right? Figure out those moments that are compelling from your past that demonstrate the compelling future that you hope to build is a real possibility. When your past and future don't align, when they don't make sense, when it feels like you're talking about two different people, then that starts to be a problem. When there are small gaps, right? So if your past and future don't quite align in terms of, like, there's some thing that you need to be able to know, or relationships you need to be able to build in order to achieve your future, there's where you can lean into the idea that the MBA is the thing that will fill that gap. All right. So that by going to Harvard Business School, I will acquire these pieces of knowledge that will serve as kind of the ramp between where I am and where I've been and where I hope to go. And again, when your past, present, and future align, it's clear that you're telling a compelling story, a story that is grounded in reality, even if it's aspirational and big picture, blue sky. When you do that, it's almost impossible to brag, right? Because it feels real to the reader. Um, so, with this in mind, when you begin your essay and your application process by thinking about who you aspire to become, right? That's one of the most important ideas, obviously. And then use those insights to select moments and stories from your past. Then you can use that to build a compelling essay. All right. Last thing, to avoid bragging and boasting, like this is bragging and boasting 101. You sound boastful when your description of yourself in the past is much grander than the story you provide to prove it. All right. You sound boastful when your description of your future doesn't align with your past and present. All right. So when you say, like, here's this awesome thing that I'm going to do, but nothing about what you're doing now or what you've done in the past makes that seem plausible. You sound boastful when you use a lot of adjectives to describe yourself, and instead of letting your actions tell the tale. Again, you shouldn't have to have sentences like, I am great at X. You should have stories that show those things. And you sound boastful when your me is much greater than your we. So make sure that you are interacting with other people in the course of your essay, and that you come across as someone who is, kind of highly interactive and highly capable based on the things that you have done and accomplished. All right. So I'll see. It doesn't look like there's questions yet. I'll give a second or two for people who have questions to throw some up here about kind of the essay writing process, etc. But if you also have questions, feel free to check us out at gurufi.com. we can either revise an existing essay that you have, or we can help you build your personal statement from the ground up. We also have CV experts who make, you know, really great CVs that can move the needle. Um, let's see. I'm not seeing any questions yet. I can wait a beat for it. Excuse me. Got a little cough. All right. Well, if there are no questions this morning, what I'll say is if you do have questions that you want to send us privately, um, shoot us an email at service@gurufi.com, and I'll be happy to answer any of those questions. Um, and otherwise, let's see, Brian on his other session. Is grammar an area to be concerned about? Yeah, but grammar is the easiest one to fix. Um, I think a lot of times, well, look, there are grammar checkers, and there's a program that I use, Grammarly.com. After I revise something, I'll just run it through that. You want to make sure that every essay that you turn in is clean, because even a really well written essay, if there are grammar issues, it sort of breaks up the flow, if that makes sense. That you're reading something and just suddenly um, there's like a mistake. You don't want that. You just want your essay to be clean and not have those. This is when you know, the thing I advise people is, find one person who you trust to go over your essay. Not a don't send it to 10 people. If you send it to 10 people, it's gonna scramble your brain, because what will happen is you get 10 pieces of advice, you'll try to use all of it, and you'll wreck your essay. So find one person that you trust, both as a writer and as someone who maybe understands something about the admissions process. And if you do that, then have them also say, look over this for grammar, syntax, spelling, etc. It says addendum, the delta between written versus spoken in an interview. What about that? Yeah, I mean, so let me answer this a couple of different ways. The first thing to understand is that you can close that delta a little bit if you're. My guess is that what you're concerned about is that if you have a really highly polished and effective essay, it's going to read much better than you sound in an interview. The easiest way to do that is to say, I'm going to write a really simple and clean personal statement. And here's what I mean by that, and here's what it doesn't mean. The best essays are actually the ones that strive for simplicity, right? And that means that, there's this. Ernest Hemingway has these rules for writing that you can find online that are really great for people who are just starting out in writing. And some of the rules are: if a simple word will do, use a simple word instead of a complicated word. If a short sentence will do, use a short sentence instead of a long sentence. The simpler that you can make your writing, the better it is. And I will tell you, look, I taught writing at Harvard for 4 years. And the thing that people get wrong the most is they think great writing is about throwing every 15-letter word in a sentence that is 75 words long. No. When you edit an essay, most of the work that you are doing is eliminating stuff, right? And that's because if you want clarity and simplicity and you want your essay to be really strong, cut it down, right? Get rid of stuff. That's the best way. You're like a sculptor who's chipping away stone that you don't need. And so if you approach writing from that point of view, the essay will be really great, but it's not like it will have all these words that only someone with an Oxford PhD would know and use. And so if you close the gap in that way, it won't be so jarring maybe in an interview when you're writing. It'll still be a really great essay. You still have an A+ essay because you focused on the structure, you focused on the content, and your word choice and your structures are really simple, which is good, not bad, it will close the gap between your level of comfort with your spoken ability versus your written ability. And by contrast, if you write like a 19th century English nobleman, very highly flowery language, that's a little bit more difficult. And so, what I would say is there's these Hemingway rules, and you can find them online. Ernest Hemingway's Rules for Writing. There's another thing that's called the paramedic method, which is a way of simplifying and improving writing. That's another great tool that you can use. If you follow those things, then you shouldn't have, assuming that you're a marginally to good speaker of English, you shouldn't have this enormous chasm, this enormous gap between the quality of your written and your spoken English. How do admissions committees review essays that show failures? Um, excuse me. Sorry, I have a bit of a cold today. So a couple of things. One, it sort of depends on what the prompt is, right? So a lot of schools will ask you about a biggest failure. And again, I do have you can find it in GMAT Club's YouTube thing. I think it's called Tough Stuff is the name of the video or something like that. And if you can't find it, send me an email, service@gurufi.com, and I can send you the link to it. But there's a couple things to think about with failure essays. So first off, if we're talking about an essay where the prompt is, tell me about your biggest failure. Three things I'll say about that. One, make sure it's an actual failure. Don't do the humble brag thing where you actually talk about how great you are. I failed in this way because I just cared too much about the client or something like that. That's nonsense and it will come across as phony. Second is choose something that allows you to talk about how you improved afterwards. So a genuine feel like I didn't do this thing well, and it forced me to improve in these ways. And it's especially good if you failed at something and you had another chance to do something similar, and you then showed that you succeeded. Right. So the first time you were the person in charge of some type of client engagement, for example, it went horribly because your presentation skills were poor. And then your boss said you've got to get better at this, and like here's 5 ways to do it. You did those things, and then you did better the next time. So that's like a good way to do it. And the third thing I'll say about it is that what the question is really asking is, what have you learned from prior failures? And that's why obviously you don't want to write about something where you just failed and got wiped out and you never improved, and it was just like, well, I took that loss and that was terrible. That can't be your essay. The essay ultimately needs to have some type of uplifting or optimistic end, where at the end of the essay it's clear that you have learned and improved in some important ways. If it's not specifically asking you for a failure, but there are times when your application necessitates that you talk about it. So for example, your GPA was a 1.2 during your freshman year, right? Then if you have some really terrible things in your application, you've got to address it, because you can't just assume that the admissions committee is just going to ignore it or not notice it. And so in those situations, it's sort of the same thing. You have to explain clearly what happened, and then also talk about how you grew and improved from it. So you're telling a story there about how this thing that happened to you maybe forced you to mature, etc., taught you important lessons about yourself, so that you can move forward from there. Um, so we have another question. How does an essay that is a retrofit, where a personal experience with the school values, principles is presented, is judged? I don't quite understand um, what you mean by an essay that is a retrofit, where a personal experience with the school's values, principles is presented and judged. Can you clarify that maybe a bit? What you mean by a retrofit? So you're talking about an essay that you've already written, and you're then trying to rework it to fit with the school. Um, I think well, if that's what we're talking about, right? So repurposing an essay, or um, kind of backwards engineering an essay or something to fit with a school. What I would say is it doesn't always make sense to have a completely new essay for every single school. That is needless work, especially when a lot of these essays will have a ton of overlap. What you should do, though, is make an original outline for each school. All right. So let's say you apply to Harvard and Stanford, right? Um, you write Harvard's personal statement first, which is kind of a more generic personal statement prompt, right? And there'll be a lot of stuff in there about the things you aspire to do and the things that you've done in the past. All right, so you've done that. Awesome. You're then going on to Stanford's essay. And Stanford has kind of this two-part essay where the first part is what matters most to you and why, and the second part is why Stanford. Now, excuse me. What I would do if I've already written the Harvard essay, I would say, okay, what a bad approach would be to take the Harvard essay and then start moving things around and then like add some stuff here and there. That's probably going to produce an essay that feels a little funky and shoehorned. But you do have that text there. So I'd set the Harvard essay aside and say, okay, I'm going to write an outline for the Stanford essay where I go through and I explain what matters most to me and why, and I'll figure out some stories to tell, etc. It will probably be the case that there will be a lot of overlap from your Harvard essay. And so what you can do with that outline then is to then copy paste things in and then revise those sections in order to fit the outline that you have. You'll find that maybe, like 2/3, maybe more of the text you can just import over with making some minor adjustments. But you do that as partly as a way to make sure that everything that you add into that second essay is a thoughtful choice. You were saying, okay, I'm going to bring this over, but before I do, I'm going to change things. That ensures that you don't have any artifacts of the old essay that get left behind. And it also allows you to make sure that everything that you put into this next essay was a choice that you made that fits in with what your goals are for what you hope that second essay is and does. And so this allows you to make sure that the second essay is still properly customized to the school that you're sending it to. But if you're going to write about the exact same experience, there's no need to do it twice. You can copy paste that in. You just need to make sure that you do that in a way where you are not trying to jam a square peg into a round hole, right? If that makes sense. All right. Any other questions here? Pardon. All right. I think that's probably it. If there are, like I said before, if you do have any questions, jump on our website, shoot me a message. Make sure that you like and subscribe to this video so that you can continue to get the content the GMAT Club puts out there. They put out a ton of these videos that can be incredibly helpful for people, especially if you're kind of doing this by yourself. It'd be incredibly helpful to help you create and customize and build an application that really moves the needle for you. I do wish all of you the absolute best in your application process. If you have any questions, please drop by gurufi.com or send me an email at service@gurufi.com. Best of luck to all of you in your MBA application process. And I hope that all of you approach your applications with the spirit of kind of confidence and positivity, that you can fully throw yourselves into it and not be afraid to show the best of what you have done, what you are, and what you can do. All right. Have a great morning / afternoon / evening, wherever you are. I'm Brian from Gurufi. I'll see you guys around.